everyone, and welcome to China EVs and More, where my co-host, Lei Xing, and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Lei and I discuss today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. For those that are new to the show, welcome. And to our loyal listeners, welcome back. We ask that you please help us get the word out to other enthusiasts. And of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I am the managing director at SAIC Auto Insights, a global management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. A very busy beaver Lei this week. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, sir. And busy probably would be an understatement. This is your co-host, Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review, and this is episode number 124. Before we start, just to mention that earlier this week, we've got our 25,000th download for the pod.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
So last August, we got our 10,000th. So less than a year, we got our 15,000th. So
our listeners have been accelerating. So we've doubled our listeners in the last probably 6 or 7 months. So
yeah, so great accomplishment, pat on the back, and we'll continue to do this.
That's perseverance, right?
Yeah. So a lot of things to discuss this week. You want to get Audi out of the way because I think it's one of the most talked about here in China and in the Western press on what they're trying to do.
Sure, man. This is one of those things where under the surface, there's a lot of fires and uncertainty and scare and fear. While in Europe and the United States, Audi seems to be doing okay, right? But in China, I just tweeted the bottom is starting to fall out for Audi in China. And you're referring to what I believe is them kicking the tires on the IM Motors EV platform. And what I mean by kicking the tires, they're looking at acquiring a platform rather than developing one in-house in order to push forward with pulling in production and development and launch of new vehicles. So what are you hearing on the China side besides they're considering it?
Well, there's not been confirmation or outright denial from both sides. So SAIC came out with a statement simply saying that there's nothing to disclose.
A non-denial denial.
Right.
No, a denial, non-denial denial. Yeah.
I think Audi also came out with some kind of statement in China, really not confirming or denying anything. So, I mean, Reuters had the latest report, and either way you look at this, I think this is something is about to go down. And to me, I think from a bigger picture, what has happened to Audi, I think Audi has lost that Wurstbrand durch technique, a brand identity. I don't know, over the last how many years. If you look at the competition on the EV, on the BV side, you see the numbers. They're well behind the BBs, not only in China, but globally. Not only ICEs, but BEVs. So I think this is an unprecedented and a desperate measure to right the ship. But this is not the first time that this type of thing has happened in China. BYD is already helping Toyota with the BZ3. It's kind of a similar kind of a foreign established legacy brand depending on China EV Inc. So it's both surprising, but not really surprising given the kind of the market environment.
A couple of things that I'd like to add. As a premium German brand, a premium proud German brand, this must be a very tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
Because Germans love to tout what I feel is a now hollowed out engineering prowess due to Dieselgate. But You talk to any German, they're going to lean into how well engineered their products are across the board, whether they're Henkel knives, whether they're Chinese EV or electric vehicles. But to your point, and I want to give people a bit of a history here because I landed in China in 2009. I saw tons of Audis, but they were driven by government folks and military folks. And so that's my reality of Audi in China. And so the e-trons were a terrible, terrible representation of EVs for Audi because I always thought that Audi exteriors were a little bit plain and they were kind of that Russian doll. They all kind of looked alike, A4, A6, A8, but the interiors were the best in the business. And now they've kind of lost the plot on everything, on the exterior and interior, because I don't know if they underestimated, I don't know if they were overconfident, but everything's starting to fall apart because a reminder to everyone, just a couple of weeks ago, they got rid of Duisman, the Audi CEO. And Bluma had an opportunity to bring in an outsider, but nope, he brought in a lieutenant that was loyal to him. So I don't know how much that's going to help Audi in the long run. But I've also said, Lei, and you've heard me say this in past podcasts, every single legacy automaker right now for any strategic product decision, mostly on the software side. So this is a huge, huge, huge make or buy decision. But every single automaker on the legacy side is going through a make or buy decision about either what's a core competency in the future for them in the EV era and what can they buy for now and build as they're using someone else's technology. So it doesn't surprise me, but it's an entire EV platform, number one. And number two, maybe you can shed some light on this, Lei. Is this a licensing deal or do they buy the rights outright and IM Motors, SAIC cannot use the platform? This is what I'm not clear about.
Well, I figure it would be in a licensing deal. I don't think it's an outright buy. Basically utilizing the platform. It's not like SAIC Motor is not going to be able to use this platform. I can't see that happening. So
Audi would build it themselves, or they would buy finished platforms from...
Well, it would be the same as, let's say, Volkswagen, a Ford, what was that model unveiled? Explorer EV based on the MEB.
Yeah.
So it would be the same setup. Yeah. The other thing about this Audi and SAIC IM is as soon as Audi decided to add a partner in SAIC, and this happened, back in 2016, 17, when they had that huge...
I want to say 17.
Yeah, fight with the dealer body. So this is another balancing act that Audi will have to... Ever since that happened, I think teaming up with SAIC, it has kind of irked the FAW partnership. And now you have this balancing act in play. And since then, it's been downhill, I think, for Audi. And this is another case that FAW is going to have to swallow as well, that the Audi is using SAIC's platform.
So a quick recap for our audience. Volkswagen Group has been rumored, or Volkswagen brand specifically, has been rumored to be kicking the tires on Huawei's operating system for EVs. And now Audi is kicking the tires on an entire EV platform from SAIC. And it's currently being used on the IM Motors L7 premium sedan. So it's already out in the market. It's a proven platform, at least from a production standpoint. So the mechanics of the transaction, it shouldn't be that difficult once the decision is made to go forward. If it doesn't go forward, we're looking at 2026 for Audi to have a vehicle on a new platform. So that is a lifetime away in China years, a lifetime away.
Yeah, and this really, the other significance is how times have changed. So in the 80s and 90s, when the foreign companies entered China, they set up these joint ventures. And the term being used then was market for technology, a well-used term in the industry. And now it's being reversed, market for technology in a completely different way, whereas the foreign companies are depending on Chinese companies. So that's the other.
So let's pull out 50,000 feet and talk about the broader implications here, because Audi and the German companies just can't keep up with the speed of the China market.
No.
That's why they continue to struggle. And it seems like they're just making hasty decision after hasty decision that's not leading to anywhere. And along the way, they're losing 6 months, they're losing 9 months, they're losing 2 years for Cariad. And completely, they're not evolving a concept or ideas. They are completely revamping strategies. And so they go from 3 months in, 6 months in, 9 months in to day one when they do these things. Okay. And so it's a cultural thing. They're going to continue to struggle until they can really understand the pace at which things and decisions need to be made in order to have successful products. I don't know if the current management, even if Bluma's only been in for months, the rest of the team is the same, right?
Yeah. This is really not an Audi thing. This is the entire foreign legacy thing. So the past week, we've heard a couple of things. So Cadillac dropping big time prices on the Lyric. And just yesterday, GAC Mitsubishi's put out a statement saying basically they're closing shop.
Yep.
This is the common situation or predicament that these foreign legacies are confronting in China, that the good times are over, basically. And they don't know how to really catch up. That's right. Even
they're not able to.
Right.
They're just not able
even to. With launching whatever EVs, they're not able to compete. So I don't really know, what's a good tactic or strategy for these companies going forward.
Well, what's going to end up happening is those companies that effectively leave the China market, they're going to lean more heavily into their incumbent markets. So look for Mitsubishi to double down in the US market, because guess what? If they decide to double down in Europe, they're competing against the same people and the same companies that they did in China, where they lost out to. And I believe that not every Chinese brand that is exported to Europe will be successful, but the ones that will be able to compete with the incumbent European brands in Europe. So I'm talking the BYDs, maybe the G6 Xpeng starting with the G6, and perhaps NIO if they can reconcile their product portfolio. There's going to be a number of brands that fail when they enter Europe. We can point to iWay's really, really struggling for a number of years now as a prime example of that, but there will be successes. And so if they leave markets like Ford, that means that Europe and the United States really, really become even more important for them. So look to these companies that fail in China to double down in the US. So
yeah, and the other thing kind of related to this, I think this is on the flip side of things. Model Y production at Giga Shanghai just got their 1 millionth production milestone. So one single model at one plant, 2.5 years. And at the same time, we're seeing these bankruptcies happening among some of the China smart EV startups. So when you look at this, put these two things together, there was that chart of all the Chinese smart EV startup brand logos.
With the X's on them?
Yeah, with many X's on them, right? So you look at these together and you're saying at the end of the day, okay, right, this is a race. And at the end of the day, it's going to be scale, it's going to be cost, it's going to be efficiency, it's going to be profitability.
It's going to be perseverance.
Yeah. And so there's still a lot of question marks for these smart EV startups. Although they are leading in a way, they are at the front so far. So that's, the interesting comparison.
And I'd argue that the only two clear winners are BYD and Tesla.
Yeah, they're heading, shoulder to shoulders. So
And, we had alluded to this in a prior podcast. Everyone else is effectively fighting for scraps.
yeah. I mean,
because to your point, we're talking tens of thousands versus single thousands for everybody else.
Yeah, so going into the July EV sales in the CPCA announcement, I think they had like 18 or so companies that did 10,000 or more in June. And those 18 accounted for over, I'd say 80, I think it was like 82, 83% of the new energy passenger vehicle sales. And then there's a bunch of others fighting for the remaining 17, 16%. Yeah.
16%, dude.
Yeah.
Before we get to your amazingly busy week, let's talk about Li Bin and his comments in the FT article today about U.S. protectionism. What are your thoughts?
He's got a point. But I think it's a little bit different, from attracting investment and being open. I think we have different stances geopolitically with the IRA, right? But he's got a point, but.
And he used Tesla and the red carpet being rolled out for them in Shanghai as a counterpoint to how the U.S. has reacted to China EV Inc. and China Battery Inc. wanting to enter the U.S. market. So,
yeah, I mean,
I think, let me tell you what I think. I think he's just throwing up a trial balloon. I think he's trying to soften the U.S. government a bit, because although we know that NIO has said they will enter the United States by 2025, we also know that they've been hiring people in San Jose on the commercial side, on the passenger vehicle side. Before, the San Jose office was mostly technical people.
Yeah.
Okay. And we know that Ganesh Iyer has switched his title to basically the head of the US from a technical title. Okay. But I've spoken with some NIO folks who hold pretty decent positions. Most of them want NIO to focus more on the China market and getting a foothold in Europe, because I will tell you, Lei, their heads are barely above water right now. And if they were to enter the China or the US market, it would be tough. Their management team would be stretched really, really thin.
Yeah.
And this at a time where EV adoption in the United States is still less than 10, 12%. And Tesla dominating with 60% of the market. Now, he could come early, or NIO could come early and try to have first mover advantage. But with all the complications of the multitude of European markets that they've already entered, and trying to right the ship in China, or at least trying to consistently create that positive trajectory, extremely positive trajectory in China during a very challenging time, I think they should really, really focus on that. The last thing I'll say, Lei, is that we know Li Bin to be fairly outspoken. And so I think he took the hit for all the other Chinese EV makers, CEOs, and said what they're all thinking. Okay. Now, he ignored the fact that for the last 35 years, with the exception of the last few, there's a requirement for a joint venture if you're a foreign automaker. Okay.
Right.
And then the second thing is so NIO can enter the US market, right? They're not banned from doing that. But, and so Facebook, Google, they're not banned from entering the China market, but they'll be severely restricted. Okay. So if I was a journalist, I would have pushed back, but they didn't. And so, yeah, he can talk about the EV sector, but if we're going to talk more broadly, then he should have to answer some of those questions about China's protectionist measures of the last 30, 40 years, right? So let's call it what it is. The IRA is a protectionist law, full stop. And so to me, just fair is fair, right? That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. And it's not like NIO, I mean, I think from a building brand point of view, NIO has been doing extremely well in Europe, but it's not like they're still at that stage of doing that. They're not at the stage where volumes are big.
It translates to sales.
Right? It's not. And I mean, US is even harder, but not that there's no demand. I think there's a lot of demand. There's a lot of retail investors and interest in NIO. And both, I think BYD and NIO they have their vehicles in the US, right? So, I mean, it's a matter of time. And
NIO is perplexing to me because I think you and I believe that the vehicles are nice. They're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but they should be selling more than they do in China. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
So it's perplexing because I think you and I our hit rates on our predictions and what we say is pretty high. I think it's like much higher than anyone else I know.
Yeah.
So it actually upsets me that I'm not predicting NIO that well. So, but you and I also said that simplifying the portfolio should help. They did cut prices, which, although a temporary measure, should help. And you had talked about building brand with NIO. I think it's important to note they've built a major established brand in China. It's not about building a brand; it's about converting now.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And so my fear is that they have this positive view from European consumers, but they're not able to convert them into buyers. Okay. So that's the current track record. And why would it be different in Europe? It shouldn't be, but perhaps they can be more savvy with their positioning and their marketing and their branding, But if I was an investor and I had a large position in NIO, I'd be more focused, or I'd want them to be more focused on the China market.
Yeah. Most distracted smart EV startup or China EV Inc. right now.
Yeah. And so let's pivot. What did you do this week, Lei?
So last week after we got off, I went to, I was originally supposed to pick up a Xpeng G6, but I think their end, they had to reschedule some of the vehicles because it's in hot demand, right? So I'm going to do that probably at the end of this month. So instead,
didn't you tell them who you are?
Sorry?
Or didn't you tell them who you are? Didn't you just say, I'm Lei Xing, dude, what are you doing?
Yeah,
you need to reschedule somebody else.
The contact with
I'm just messing with you.
They know me, but they have the people
with
on the ground dealing with actually delivering or dropping off vehicles.
No, I'm just messing with you.
Yeah, no, I know. So I ended up, it was interesting because last time, I came back, I told a former coworker who works at Avatar, when I'm back in the summer, get me a vehicle for me to drive. And so I picked up an Avatar 11. Now this is the one I have is the top trim. So it's the super long range dual motor trim. And basically it's got the CATL NCM 116 kilowatt hour, I believe. So big battery with about 700 kilometers.
Huge battery.
Yeah, that's 700 kilometers of range. And I've never, we talk about China EVs, right, all this time. And for this specific vehicle, never really look into the specs or how the vehicle feels. So it's really blind for me just to go and pick up. And the thing I really want to say is part of the reason why these foreign legacies EVs are not doing well is when you get into the vehicle and how intuitive things are. I think the Chinese EV brands are doing that very well. So for me, just get in and know where to push or, on the screens and the steering wheel buttons.
It just feels natural.
Yeah, it feels natural. I think there's a lot of copycatting with what Tesla has done, the scrolls on the steering wheels.
Yeah.
the UIs on the behind the steering wheel and the big screen, I think they all look the same. I think this is the homogeneity we talked about, not only in terms of the design, but I'll talk about Zeekr X as well. I mean, these vehicles, when you get in, the center console, how the not the buttons, but the icons are displayed on the bottom, they all look very much the same.
They do.
Yeah, but things just work. I mean, whether it's playing with the screens, the response rate. And so I've been driving this thing quite a lot, I would say. Probably I've driven more than 500 kilometers on this thing.
Nice.
Mostly city driving on the ring roads, a little bit on the expressway when I
side roads.
yeah,
and stuff?
when I went to Yizhuang for the robotaxi. So I actually drove this right after I picked it up last Friday around noontime. You had to also, like XPeng, first watch a video and then do a test. So you have to answer some questions after watching the video before you can actually drive the vehicle. So I had my own, phone number and register with the vehicle in order to use it and drive it. And it took some time to do it, but it was done. I drove to Yizhuang, and then it was, checking out the Baidu Apollo Park. That was amazing experience to see all the different generations. Mostly, I think the fourth and fifth generation robotaxis inside that. You call it the depot, right?
Yep.
Yeah, where they calibrate and dispatch these robotaxis.
For those that aren't familiar with robotaxis, there's a huge, effectively barn or garage within this. It's almost like a hangar.
Hangar, yeah.
Okay, it's not as large. It's not as large as an airplane hangar, but it can fit dozens of cars in it. And within the hangar, there's a large garage. And in that garage, that's where each and every robotaxi recalibrates its sensors every day before it goes out. And it's really cool experience because when I first went to the depot, I think they told me each car took up to a couple of hours to recalibrate.
Yeah.
Then the next time I went there was just a bunch of QR codes on the walls.
Yeah.
And it takes less than 2 or 3 minutes. So we're talking that type of technological advancement and moving forward within months.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is not specific to Baidu. It's just that Baidu offers the most robust tour of their depot of anyone that I've seen anyways, or I've been a part of. So
when you drive into the depot, on the right, there's the calibration station, and on the left, a set of parking spaces. And I must say there were probably close to 100 robotaxis sitting there.
You could call Yizhuang Baidu's home turf.
Yeah, it's a robotaxi city, basically, because there's that special...
But specifically for Baidu.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Pony also, but it's a Baidu stronghold.
Yeah. And then when directly in front of you, there's 5 or 6 generations of robotaxi on display. And then to the right, there's this kind of the central command where they can see, I couldn't take pictures, but there's this huge screen where you can see live data of all the robotaxis running around. And then there's also a place, I don't know whether you saw last time,
It's like a command center.
Yeah, there's 4 or 6 kind of like video game stations where there's
gaming console.
Yeah, where there's people sitting there and watching. Actually, what do you call this? This is the kind of the backup drivers. Yeah,
backup emergency.
Yeah, they're watching these robotaxi not only in Beijing, but let's say in other parts of China where Baidu is running, live monitoring and supervising. In case something happens, they can take over. And so that was interesting. And then
anywhere in China, they can take over.
Yeah.
So it's not just Beijing for Beijing. They can take over anywhere.
So the robotaxi, the fully driverless robotaxi I rode on is the 5th generation using an RFox. So it's the one priced at $480,000. I think this was announced or unveiled 2 years ago, I would say.
Let's also comment on the generation side by side with each other. And how much the sensors and the LiDAR shrink from Gen 1 to Gen 2 to Gen 3, Gen 4, Gen 5.
Yeah, from a streamlined perspective, it's a lot simpler, right? So basically, we did a loop, leaving right out of the front of the depot and back, and took about 40 minutes or so. And even the Baidu employees who sat, there was three of us sat in the back. They even saw some new stuff that they've never seen. Let's say for some of the traffic light recognition and countdown stuff on the screen in the back. And then it was pretty smooth. I would say there was two interesting corner cases that we confronted. One is there's this truck backed out of the gate, and it's blocking the lane. So, and there's another truck parked on the other lane, so the other opposite lane, and the robotaxi tried to veer and go around the first truck, and incoming there's a vehicle coming. So the robotaxi immediately it kind of reached to the left, and then it saw the vehicle, and then it kind of veered back to this side of the road. And then once that incoming vehicle passed, it kind of slowly reached out, and then there's no vehicles, and they ran right around the truck. So I thought that was interesting corner case where the robotaxi handled pretty good. And then the other one is basically similar situation with the incoming truck and a slow bus in front of us. Similar situation where the robotaxi kind of tried to pass the bus but slow down because of the incoming truck. Other than that, you said...
So there was no people throwing pylons on top of the hood?
No.
Did you hear about that?
No, I didn't.
So people in San Francisco are throwing pylons on top of the Cruise robotaxis, and they just stop. But anyways, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And you had said one of the episodes that you felt Baidu was better than Cruise, if I recall.
I do, yeah.
Relatively better. So my feel is that I would rate it as a tie. I didn't feel Baidu was clearly or significantly better than Cruise, because when we compare these two kind of operating environments, Cruise only operates at night, but it's in the city. Whereas...
Well, they operate during the day. They operate during the day now.
Well, now they probably do, right? And whereas Baidu operates during the day only, but they're in this Yizhuang area, which is not typical of Beijing city driving conditions. So it's hard to compare apples to apples. But I would say that the Baidu robotaxi is relatively conservative in terms of the speed that it's going. It was going at certain points much faster than Cruise, which was, I think, in the entire time we rode last November was under like 30 miles per hour. But in Beijing, basically, robotaxi goes to the max speed limit wherever they are.
Or the flow of traffic.
Yeah, flow of traffic. But in certain situations, I think you would, I was telling the other Baidu people that, see, this situation when you make a turn, it seemed a lot more conservative than with a human driving. So that's my thought. But I mean, in terms of the number of miles or the kilometers driven, there's a few hundred Baidu robotaxis running since,
in a number of cities. 4, 5, 6 cities.
Mostly, since the pandemic, I would say, because this region of Yizhuang, the Beijing highly automated driving district, only started in, I think, September of 2020. Yeah. So and then get this. So immediately afterward, I tried out the WeRide driverless robotaxi
in Yizhuang as well, or
in Yizhuang. And I think I might be one of the first to ever try it, because they just got the license, right, in Beijing. And immediately I can tell the difference between, let's say, a big established company as Baidu versus a startup. The WeRide is much more aggressive in certain driving conditions. Making a turn, accelerating, it's much, much more aggressive. So
Pony is much more aggressive than Baidu as well.
yeah,
So
I figure these smart EV startups, they have different planning, decision control algorithms than Baidu, but Baidu has more data, I believe, more
but
vehicles
we
running.
should also note, Lei, that WeRide is a Guangzhou-based company, so maybe their algo is customized for Guangzhou, and then they recustomize it for Beijing, but that driving habits in Guangzhou are different than Beijing.
Yeah,
And so WeRide, being new to Beijing, is probably leaning heavily towards its Guangzhou data set to use for driving in Beijing until they build out the Beijing data set, right? So the aggressiveness might be the algo, but it might be the data as well or something. So
yeah, exactly.
so I don't know, I'm guessing, but we should try to get another AV person on besides,
Yeah.
or maybe get Maxwell back. Although now I think he's pretty well PR trained, so maybe he won't be as open with his answering questions. So
Yeah. And this is something I learned new this time. There's three separate license or permits that these robotaxis are using in Yizhuang. So there's the
right.
是, which means testing. There's the 营, which means operation. And there's the 营. And then there's there's the 测, which means testing. There's the 试, I think it's trial operation. And then 营 is actually the ones open to public and actually they can pay. But these are only for ones with a safety driver. Now, on Friday last week happened to be the day when BJHAD announced that they will soon start operating fully driverless robotaxis paid. So basically, let's say Baidu, you use their app and you can hire or hail a fully driverless robotaxi and paid from the general public.
So like Cruise, effectively in San Francisco.
Yeah. So that was, coincidentally, it happened on the same day. And right afterwards, they had this festival at one of the malls there where they showed all these different robotaxis from different platforms. And also the driverless, the robots, the delivery vehicles, kind of from Jingdong, Meituan.
Yeah.
And so that was a great day of experience.
Effectively, every single time I go to China, I'm going to ride these taxis to see how they've improved. And next time I go to San Francisco, I'm going to try it because you do see and feel it. I know for sure that. So I rode WeRide early days in Guangzhou. So I'd love to see how it's improved. I was really impressed, but that was really also one of my first autonomous vehicle experiences.
Yeah.
So now that we are both wildly veterans of the robotaxi game, we're not as many rides in as Taylor and the Snowball Capital team, but I would put us up against any Western analyst or anyone that's ridden these Western robotaxis because, in Shanghai or in my last trip, I rode 4 robotaxis, right? So, and I do want to say between my first Baidu trip and my second Baidu trip, or my last Baidu trip, it improved significantly. So, and we're talking less than a year or a year at the most between 2 trips. So it's worth trying out every month, every few months to see how the ride is different, better, maybe worse, maybe, I just think that it's worth going every single time to check them out. So
it's safe to say you and I were probably one of the two of the few that have ridden in both robotaxis in the US and China.
Although there are research firms that are still rating Chinese autonomous vehicles, yet I've not known any of them to be in China. So.
Yeah. So I think it was great to see and compare finally, and two in the same afternoon. I mean, I think I was on cloud nine that afternoon because not many people get to do it, and you do it once, but twice in the same location with two different companies.
How far away was We Ride's depot?
No, we met at the mall where this festival was going on. So
Okay, got it.
this rewrite vehicle is using the GAC Ion S.
Okay.
So it's just parked there, and I went there and hopped on and experienced it.
So it makes a lot of sense to using GAC because guess what? GAC is in Guangzhou, right?
Yeah, and also well, I mean GAC and then the Nissan, they're one of the investors in WeRide.
So it's important to note that also these, although they've been, to your point just now, they've been invested in by automakers. If it was up to Deep Route, they'd be agnostic on that. They would work with any automaker and work with them not only to build out their products, but to integrate it into the design so that it looks like more like a normal vehicle. So, WeRide, they have vested interest. Nissan is a bit player in China.
Yeah. No, and that same day, I've had back to the Avatar 11. I also want to talk about a little bit of the assisted driving functions.
Well, let's do this. Let's do this, Lei. It is 9:54 on the East Coast. I know let's open it up.
Sure.
You can keep talking for a few minutes, and then if there's any questions, I know Jay or Alfred's in here currently. If they have any questions, just raise your hands. Happy to bring you up and listen to what you have to say. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just want to say also, not only on the same afternoon, I rode on two different fully driverless robotaxi, but also during that day, I tested out some assisted driving functions on the After 11. So this vehicle has the Huawei ADS 2.0, and just to, for those that are not familiar, Avatar is Chang'an, CATL, and Huawei joint developed brand, and there's a lot of Huawei technology in it. So this Huawei ADS 1.22 is the current version, and they had just pushed out 2.0. So it's not on this, but there's this NCA, which is the navigation-based cruise assistant. And then there's this LCC, which is lane centering control. And so that day I was driving around in different conditions. There was a huge rain on Fifth Ring Road. The LCC works quite nicely on the ring roads during stop and go traffic. I was kind of amazed by how really helping your feet, right? To rest kind of, but still holding the wheel and focus on the front. And this system also for the NCA, when you get onto let's say, the expressway going down to Yizhuang, they will notify you that this section of the expressway, this is based on high definition mapping, the NCA is available. And these things, I think they are qualifiers now. They're not differentiators. So that's, again, going back to the earlier topic on these foreign legacies, is because they don't have these on their vehicles. And these are the things that are really right now in cutthroat. The Li Auto's NOA, NIO just pushed out the NLP Plus, these basic advanced assisted driving capabilities was extremely advanced, I think, specifically on this Avatar 11. I haven't tested out others, but it just works.
I think it's important to remember that. That's also why Volkswagen Group is kicking the tires on Huawei. So
yeah, and the UI UX, I mean, it's smooth. It just where to go to figure things out.
But Lei, talk about homogeneity. If multiple brands are using Huawei operating system, oh my God.
Yeah.
It's going to be the same system.
Yeah.
And the only real difference is going to be the electric motors and the battery pack, effectively.
And I also think because of the number of sensors and even LiDARs on this vehicle and on many other models, the screen behind the steering wheel, I think there's a bit of an information overload because it would show these pedestrians and trucks and buses and cars right next to you. I mean, it's ridiculous how much information is being shown because of these sensors.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things where eventually you'll find the right balance of what to show and what not to show. But the pendulum is definitely swinging towards over information or information overload. So, as because we have to remember, Huawei is a new player in this space. They didn't do really anything in the automotive space, not at this level, anyways, in the past. So, they're still learning too, right? Their UX designers are still trying to figure things out and sort things out. So they see what Tesla's doing. I'm sure they do competitive analysis and see what all these other people are doing. And they're like, oh, yeah, it'd be great to put that into the screen. It'd be great to do that. Pull the data from this sensor and that sensor, create an image, and then throw it on the head up display or whatever, right? So,
Yeah, and this Avatar 11, the NCA or the LCC, they don't have automatic lane change. They have the stock initiated lane change, and it works as close to as me, let's say, or any 老司机 advanced drivers doing a lane change. It's pretty amazing. I mean, it just feels natural. And I'm sure many others that I haven't driven, and I'll try the G6 later on, will have similar experiences. And and this is a brand that's only been in the market for less than 2 years. So
yeah, but it has some
yeah,
experienced backers. So I think that's important because I see Avatar being one of the ones that stick around. So
their sales numbers are not yet great. I mean, the thousands, but Chang'an has many other brands, as we talked about last episode. So,
and it's weird, right? Because up until the only reason I would know Chang'an is because of Ford, and you don't actually see that many Chang'ans on the roads in Beijing. Let me say that. So
yeah, you mean Ford?
Yeah, no, well the Chang'an brands, right? The actual Chang'an brands.
Yeah, Chang'an. Well, yeah, relatively no, yeah.
And so for them to go so aggressively in the EV space, I think it's refreshing. It probably pisses Ford off, but
so basically, the comparison I would say for every 1,000 Teslas or BYDs I see a Mach-E or a Lyric. That's how popular and the BATs are in Beijing and many other cities, perhaps.
And we have to remind people this is before Jidu, Xiaomi, two technology brands are even on the roads yet. So I think it's great. Now, the timing is just coincidental, but it's great that Jidu and Xiaomi are avoiding this price war for as long as they can.
Yeah.
So, man, that's all I had, really.
So the other thing is I want to talk about the Zeekr X and the Denza N7 because I went to check out the largest Zeekr center in Beijing the other day. And then yesterday I took my kids. They wanted to go to this secret room or escape room in Sunnytown. So there's this Denza N7 store. I won't go into details, but right now, after seeing these two separate vehicles, I have a little bit of concern because the Zeekr X is completely not the brand, the vibe that the 001 and the 009 exudes.
For sure.
Right? It seems to be specifically tailored to female drivers. There's a lot of features or functions that on this X that we tested. I think it's a U5-seater version. It just doesn't feel. I mean, when you see the 009 and when you see the 001, the majestic, what do you call it, the vibe, it just feels different. And same for the N7. It's completely different from the D9. So I will just say let the sales speak for themselves, but I am a little bit concerned that this, in terms of brand positioning, I don't know whether that'll work out. Now both of us have great expectations for the X, but it somehow it just doesn't match the brand positioning for some reason.
Does not at all.
Yeah.
And the pricing doesn't either.
Yeah. And X, right? The 200,000 range. I mean, there's the G6, and actually the Denza people in the showroom, they actually, yeah, I asked them about, I put my consumer hat on. I was like, oh, I might be also looking at the G6, and they're like, oh, the G6 is great. And then they said something that was funny. They said G6 is now kind of the savior vehicle for Xbone. But at BYD, we don't have that problem. At Denza, we don't have that problem.
Oh man. So
I tweeted the L5, right? The Hongqi L5. Some dude stepped off the L5 and just went into the Denza showroom for some reason. I don't know what's going on there.
he was driving or he was being driven?
He was being driven, stepped off,
Okay.
and there's this kind of commotion. All the employees went out to greet. I don't know who this guy was, but yeah. So these are
Well, VIP for sure.
yeah. No, just talking again. Talking, seeing, experiencing.
That Hongqi is freaking awesome looking, by the way. So
It just makes you
love that.
understand better why the foreign companies are not falling behind. The speed of change, the speed of market launches. Yeah. So that's why I said, after 20 years and 2.5 years doing this, I've never had an experience owning or driving a Chinese brand EV for a significant time. And now that I have, and I think I'm now more qualified to speak about China EVs.
Do you just plug it in underground parking?
The charging, that's another thing. Just everything just works. Whether it's cams, whether it's Shell, maybe I'll try a Neo charger next time.
And the payment system is
just scan, just WeChat.
Yeah, that's it. So our stuff is way too clunky, way too clunky.
Yeah, there's just one standard in China. There's not a CCS, there's not a NACS. You're not going to see this Tesla for GM moving to Tesla thing happening in China because everything's standard.
Well, they we can look at that in the rearview mirror of the United States. So that is one hurdle that needed to be kind of jumped over before.
So now I am in Beijing, grain of salt, where things are pretty charging infrastructure is well established. And that's why you see these policies coming out trying to push this infrastructure even in rural areas. It's probably going to be a lot different in rural areas. But in Beijing, there's no range anxiety whatsoever if you own an EV and driving mostly in Beijing. And
you know what's funny, Lei, is that people ask me about that, right? People ask me about charging infrastructure. Not one time when I spoke to anyone who owned an EV in China did they say, I have some challenges with charging. I have range. No one. It just doesn't exist, at least in Beijing and Shanghai and the places that I visited, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't know what the right formula is from the standpoint of how many chargers per electric vehicles on the road, but in China tends to overdo things, right? With build out of new technology. And so maybe there's too many chargers, but I've just never, and people ask me, are they afraid, where do they charge? And I'm like, you know what? I've never really thought that deeply about it because no one's ever complained about it to me. So
the CAMs, the Volkswagen Joy Venture charging brand, the station I went to was not early in the morning, but 9:30 in the morning. There's nobody there. So I could request a charger. I can kind of, 30 minutes in advance, get there, lower the lock and park, charge, and get out, right? And this charging speed, they're rated 120 kilowatt, and you get about 115 to 119.
Oh, wow. So that's fast.
Yeah. Well,
so it's real.
It's real. So also because I was the only one charging there. So that might have some reason.
And so it's two things, right? So the top charging speed is achieved, but also over a long period of time.
Yeah.
Right? Because it might get to the top charging speed, but it doesn't stay there very long. And so that's one of the challenges with charging, because it tells you what the peak is, but most charging infrastructure, and to your point, especially if there's more than one vehicle being charged, it never reaches that peak.
Yeah. And at the Shell charging station, there was probably, I don't know, 60, 70 spaces, half was filled. And I charged it to 90%. So from 80 to about 90%, it was much lower, because I think that's pretty common for EV charging. It slows down.
Yeah, so that's when it slows down. That's when it throttles down.
Yeah,
right?
it was like 70 to 80 kilowatt.
Because I think it's transferring most of its juice to cars that are less powered.
Yeah. And you know, I had the benefit of having a bigger battery and longer range in the vehicle. So also,
yeah, dude, helps. you were electricity hog basically. So
yeah,
because I was told the average battery size in China is about 55 kilowatt hours. That's what I was told. So you're twice as large as the average.
And Neil is coming out finally with the 150 kilowatt hour battery later this year.
So yeah, man, that's all I had.
That's all I had as well. Just really appreciative and loving the ownership and every experience related with having an EV.
I am glad you are. Have you, when do you need to give this back?
Back to the US?
No, back to Avatar?
No, I can give it back until before I leave.
Your homework, Lei?
Yeah.
Is testing the connected features.
Yeah.
You know, either via the iPhone, or you can tell your Avatar contact to activate some of the connected features so you can try them out.
Yeah, the Bluetooth and connecting the phones were pretty seamless, straightforward.
Let's start getting into a deeper dive. What else can it do?
Yeah,
you know, I'm sure you can watch ETE. You can do all these other things, right? So
there's movies on the right, the passenger side. There's this also screen that you can watch, you know, iQIYI and stuff like that. The only thing I have to worry about is parking. Is actually, I wouldn't say expensive, but it piles up. But I'm getting this car for free, so what the heck, you know?
Well, that's that situation I had with Li Auto when they allowed me to borrow the Li One. I borrowed it for like 3 or 4 days, but it was like 150 kuai a day to park it, and I was like, you know, I'd love to keep it, and I wasn't planning on any long trips. And so I couldn't take it a real advantage. So after about 4 days, I gave it back.
Yeah.
So anyways, hey, everyone, again, thanks for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We will try to get back to a normal cadence in the next few weeks so that we aren't yo-yoing around with different times every week.
Yeah, it's mostly Thursdays and Fridays, probably.
Hey, man, have a good weekend. I'll talk to you on WeChat, sir.
You too, man. And talk to you guys next week.
Bye. That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SINOAUTOINSIGHT. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.